Patrick Klepek. Let's talk about Echo episodes 1 and 2. Episode 1 entitled Chafa, episode 2 entitled Loak. I will read the description of these episodes from the website that I streamed them at. Episode 1, after her mother's tragic death, young Maya is forced to leave her hometown of Tamaha, Oklahoma, and move to New York City, where she meets Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin, who raises her to be a ruthless assassin. After learning that Fisk had her father killed, Maya kills Kingpin and flees New York City. In episode 2, Maya enlists the help of her disapproving family to take down Fisk's army. Meanwhile, she begins experiencing strange visions. End quote. So that's what happens in episode 1 and 2. Patrick Klepek, let's start by talking about whether we thought these episodes were good or not and whether you think people should watch them. What do you think, Patrick?
I think it's fascinating. Do you remember what is the new branding that Marvel is attaching, starting with Echo?
Marvel Spotlight. Now, the Marvel Spotlight logo appears on the beginning of every episode. There's a new Michael Giacchino theme that happens when you hear about it. Marvel Spotlight was announced several months ago, and I'm going to read the description of what Marvel Spotlight is. From one of the top Google results for the words Marvel Spotlight. This is from ScreenRant.com. With the premiere of Echo, Marvel Studios is introducing a new banner, Marvel Spotlight, which will highlight content that does not require background knowledge of the Marvel Cinematic Universe story arcs. And by the way, that sentence was bold. Will highlight content that does not require background knowledge. This represents a major shift in Marvel's approach, which through the MCU timeline has been building upon previous movie shows and characters through lines, most notably in the Infinity Saga arc, which was the franchise's major plotline through MCU Phase 1 through 3, end quote. So, Marvel Spotlight, interesting that it does not require any background knowledge of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So anyway, you were saying, Patrick Klepek, this extremely standalone, independent story that does not require any background knowledge. Go ahead.
Right. And the other major contrast is all the episodes are dropping at once, right?
Yes.
So you can watch episodes 1 through 5 right away, as opposed to sort of like the weekly event viewing that Marvel or Disney Plus in general has done with their television shows since the launch of Disney Plus and all these Marvel and Star Wars shows have rolled out. I bring all that up because I agree. In theory, that sounds like a really interesting idea to give creative freedom and reduce some of the weight of expectations on every one of these shows. And yet, one of the first messages I got from one David Chen upon beginning to watch this show was, hey man, I didn't watch Hawkeye. What the hell is going on in this show? Because yes, like this show, I think eventually gets to a place where it feels like roughly self-contained in the geography and where it is. It's a rough road getting there to where it can feel like it has established that sort of independence from the broader Marvel universe. I broadly like the shows so far. I think, unfortunately, where I probably land on is that I like what it's trying to do more than I like what it's actually doing. On paper, there are so many cool ideas. The way this like character, like, you know, doesn't speak, like uses like sign language. Like a lot of characters are speaking in sign. Like there are whole arguments, like emotional arcs between characters that are happening, communicated in a way that I just haven't seen in television before, let alone in sort of a superhero story that has to often like be full of bombast and explosion, and like to have to communicate that in this fundamentally different way, I think is cool. The idea of a character that has some sort of supernatural communication history with their ancestors is a unique idea in and of itself. There's like a really cool fight in the middle of the first episode. I just don't know that it all quite can. I don't know where it's like quite going. I'm having trouble emotionally connecting to the arc of Echo as a character. And I did watch Hawkeye. So I am like, I've watched everything that Marvel has put out. I am completely up to date, like emotionally, spiritually, physically with everything they've put out. I think mostly it just speaks to some of the convoluted storytelling and choppy storytelling that has defined a lot of Marvel television, which the quality is sort of all over the place. And it rarely feels like it's something all moving on the track in the same direction. And so I think it's such an interesting show, and I guess sort of what I like wish for this show in general is like I don't think they'll ever make a show like this again. Doesn't seem like like it doesn't seem like the kind of thing Marvel would probably greenlight in the direction they're going. But I wish it had been in production like 2 years from now, where it's like it really could have been wholly separate from anything. It could have just been conceptualized on its own. Because I think that weight hurts yourself getting into it. And then the first two episodes are like good but not great. And I don't know where the last three will go from there. But how about you?
Yeah, I think as I have, you can kind of tell from my tone, using Marvel Spotlight in this way to introduce this story is. I don't know what the vision for that brand is, but to use it on Echo, I think is ludicrous based on everything I've seen. Like the description I've read of what Marvel Spotlight is, there was a big PR beat around this a few weeks ago where Deadline and Screen Rant and Slash, everyone wrote like Marvel Spotlight is like non-interconnected stories. It's you don't need any background knowledge. Meanwhile, literally the first 30 minutes is, in my opinion, virtually completely incomprehensible if you have not had some background knowledge of what's going on in Marvel. And so I literally don't even know what they're trying to accomplish. Are they saying Marvel Spotlight is actually different than what they had originally sold it as, or did they just do a really bad job of launching the first Marvel
I
Spotlight
think they're
show?
retrofitting something as Marvel goes through sort of a creative crisis, right? Like
Right.
this sounds like a key, like originally when Echo was announced to be a like, hey, it's going to come out every week in the same way. It was like, oh, are they burying a bad show? Which is wow, that's a really bad look for like the kind of marginalized characters they are like portraying in this to be the one that like guess we're unceremoniously just dumping this one out and
Right.
giving it a different branding. And so I think there's been a lot of massaging of that message to try and
Yeah.
like convey like no, this isn't like a reflect like that we don't care about characters like this. Kevin Feige has gone out of his way be like, I mean, there was a whole PR campaign essentially privately by Disney to like throw under the bus a previous executive of theirs. It was like, well, he was kind of a racist and a misogynist and wouldn't let us make characters like Black Perlmutter, right? Was the
Yeah.
executive. And so I don't. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I think it does a disservice to Echo as a character. I think it does a disservice to this branding for whatever it's attempting to do because it really feels like they came up in a corner with a branding and an explanation for a path forward and then just shoved this show into it, regardless
Right.
of whether it actually fits where it might go in the future.
It's very bizarre. And even putting it, let's say I have seen everything in Marvel and I love everything in Marvel. I still think it's a disastrous way to open the show. I still think the way they opened the show was very alienating and bizarre because they're just showing you scenes from other shows without any explanation. You know, just do a previously on, have a relative do a voiceover, have Maya explain to someone what happened, like do something. But they're just literally showing random scenes, not random, but like
Yeah.
time sequential scenes from from other shows, and like hoping that you will glean enough from them that you can kind of get to where you need to go. And it's bad storytelling. Like there are ways to catch people up, and we've seen Marvel do variously, do sometimes a good job, sometimes a bad job of catching people up. This is a bad job. They did a bad job catching people up. And there's only 5 episodes in the show. And so 30 minutes of one of the episodes being that bad is like a significant portion of the entire show's runtime. Um, so putting that aside, it's fine.
Yeah.
Everything else is fine. Um, and in fact, there is some actually really creative stuff going on in this show. The beginning of episode 2 opens with a scene that happens in 1200 AD of characters playing Choctaw stickball, and it's unlike anything you have ever seen on television before. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, like even if this show just gave me that, that's like a really interesting idea and execution, and um, so there's some really cool elements about it, but it also feels like it suffers from a lot of what Marvel's TV shows suffer from, which is feels like it needs to be interconnected, and then also ultimately feels like it might be inconsequential depending on what they want to do with the next TV shows and movies, because they can't change the status quo too much. You can't have planet Earth explode or a celestial hand come out of the thing, because you'd have to address it in future movies. Oh wait, you know what I mean? Like you can't have like
Kingpin can't die. Like, I know
right,
they're making a new Daredevil show, and I'm sure
right.
he is going to be a villain.
Even though theoretically we thought Kingpin died, and that's the other thing too. Is like it's connected to like two versions of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Like the Daredevil version, which then like carried over into Hawkeye, and and then now the MCU that everyone knows. Anyway, so I think it not only doesn't do anything to assuage concerns about, oh, I need to do a bunch of homework to get into the show. It actively leans into how hard it is, for better or for worse, in ways that I think are actually like really clumsy and counterproductive, and unforced errors is what I would describe it as. So those are some overall thoughts. I don't think the show is bad or anything, but the opening is almost catastrophically terrible, and the rest of the show is fine. Based on what we've seen so far.
Well, you're certainly not going to. There's nothing in that intro to this suggests to you if this branding, in its most idealized form, was look. Not everyone wants to stay on the train where they're like keeping up
Yeah.
with these interconnected stories, which seem like they're now about to shift more to the films than they are to the television stuff, as they kind of like move the dynamic around of how Marvel tells stories in theory. But there's nothing about this show that you would go, well, hey, I know you don't really like the superhero stuff and you don't keep up with those movies anymore, but like this show is really interesting and it's only 5 episodes. Some of the episodes are only 35 minutes long. Like you could just watch this and have a good time, and you don't have to care about like what's happening in the Marvels. Like they do not accomplish. Like there's nothing to suggest these first 2 episodes.
If that is the goal, they do not accomplish that. Right?
I do not think they've accomplished that so far, and I don't get the sense that that's going to happen in the next couple episodes. I can be swayed in any number of directions. Like I want the show to be good. I'd like it to be better than how I feel about it now, but it doesn't seem like that's a cool idea to have, like self-contained,
yes,
or even
that.
their own or even their own little universes, right? Like in many ways, the Netflix shows became their own little Netflix. They call it, the Netflix like Marvel Cinematic Universe, because like
right.
those characters overlapped and they felt like they were in the same place, but it was small and exciting. And so like, even when those characters did overlap, it felt. I mean, they worked up to a Defenders. Now the Defenders show was pretty bad, but like there's a way you can do that in a smaller pocket, and that's not what's happening here. Like, and so not doesn't fully accomplish it here, but I'm hoping at least the last 3 episodes contain something, like you said, more scenes that are novel and interesting and could fit.
I posted about this on Threads, right? Threads, by the way, I have found to be a very terrible experience, because what happens is you post an opinion, and then Facebook/Meta figures out how to serve that opinion to the people who hate that opinion the most, and then you get like just inundated with all this criticism of your opinion, and in a way that is much more rapid than it was on Twitter. Like with Twitter, things would need to marinate for like 12 hours before you start getting like endless bounds of hate. But I said on Twitter, on Threads, exactly what I said on this podcast, which is, hey, baffling decision to start this Marvel Spotlight thing with the way they did it. And I got a bunch of people saying, well, I thought Marvel Spotlight was more like, street level stuff as opposed to like intergalactic stake stuff. You're wrong. You're wrong. Okay. If that's what you thought, because, or they didn't message it correctly, because if you look, I literally read the description from Screen Rant, and many other places describe it exactly the same way, which is Marvel Spotlight doesn't require knowledge of the MCU. It's disconnected from everything else. It's not just like lower level stakes or any such shit like that. You're freaking wrong if that's what you thought. Or they did a really bad job getting their PR talking points to everyone when this thing launched a few months ago. One of those is true, but I did not misinterpret what Marvel Spotlight was supposed to be. Arguably, they did. and they made it. All right. Patrick Klepek, let's talk about what actually happened in the episode. Like, is there anything you want to highlight about what happens in the first 2 episodes of the show? It's what's interesting is like every episode seems to open at some point in the past, right? And like be part of some kind of legend, which I think is just really like a cool way to open it. The Choctaw stickball in particular was just like, wow, the way they shot it in ultra wide angle was really, really cool. And I just like, oh wow, I haven't seen any sports shot like this, period, let alone this particular sport that I've never witnessed. So there's some really creative decisions happening. The action is solid, throughout the first 2 episodes. Like, I didn't think it was particularly amazing. Didn't think it was particularly bad or anything. It's just like, hey, these are like really solid down the middle action scenes. One of which is made to look like a long continuous shot, which is kind of a classic Marvel TV show move. The only other thing I want to highlight is Maya is kind of an anti-hero, in a way that I think is
Yeah.
rare in MCU stuff. She shoots Kingpin in the eye, thinking that would kill him because that's a very logical thing. Most people who get shot in the head die. Not all, but most
I
people
try
get
to
shot in the
avoid
head.
it as
Yeah.
much as possible.
100%. But that didn't kill him, and so against all odds, he survives, and that's probably going to become a problem. But then the second episode involves her hijacking a cargo train to locate a munitions container and then plant a bomb in one of the crates that she later detonates to kind of flummox Fisk's plans. But she also just kills a bunch of people, right? Like, she just straight up murders all these dudes, right? And yes, they were bad dudes, and they're probably going to do bad things with the munitions, but she's kind of cold blooded in a way that I think other Marvel characters aren't. Any thoughts on Maya as a character so far, Patrick Klepek?
No, I agree. The most interesting part of her character is, obviously she, the way in which she was removed from this community she was originally was very traumatic. She seems to carry that trauma. She hasn't, the way she finds her back home is a lot of people she hasn't seen in literally 20 years as a refrain. Like, this is how you could have had a chance to come back. You became an adult. You could have come back to this community and you chose not to. And that's rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. She meant a lot to this community. And the way in which she comes back and kind of the coldness in which she describes, like, I'm going after Fisk. I don't care if I'm bringing a war, like a literal war, to my hometown, to people I, ostensibly care about. I expect.
Yeah, she's going to learn she'll learn some valuable lessons about not bringing a war to your hometown, perhaps, right?
Yeah, like, there are multiple characters. I'm like, I can, like, there's some characters in particular is like, well, you're clearly going to die, and that's going to soften her up, and like, like I can see sort of the arc is going here probably.
Yeah,
but regardless of if that's where it ends up, I'm with you that between kind of like the historical ancestral legacy they're pulling on, the nature of how they kind of convey her powers, her ability to survive and adapt, like power adjacent, really, just like how does she move through the world, I think is conveyed like really well, really interestingly. And again, I'll go back to a point from earlier. Like, I'm always fascinated to, like, whenever we get into an extended dialogue scene, I'm just fascinated to watch how they frame it, how the actors work off one another, because the way they have to convey heightened emotions to one another is just fundamentally different, because the central character, like, is not going to communicate in the way that, like, the language of, like, most characters are going to be in a television or a film. And so it's a unique challenge from, like, a storytelling point of view. And I think they've found good solutions and interesting ways to convey longer stretches of dialogue in a way that I think could have fallen really flat, or like, because the challenge to them is like, how do we not make this boring? And I think they do a really good job of conveying Echo's emotions. Like, it's really interesting how the entire community around her also speaks to her. Like you can tell they grew up with her, and so they learned how to sign. But I just think all that stuff is really compelling. And I think part of the reason I found myself disappointed by the show is it's such a unique set of circumstances to tell a story. And so the parts where it falls flat feel really disappointing compared to, like, the set of tools, like the kind of material you're working with. Because it's just rare to have a character like this. And so if it's a rare opportunity, do something strong with that storytelling. And it feels like the big story is going to be pretty formulaic from here through 5.
I see. So I was going to ask, where does it fall flat for you in kind of the broader story, in your opinion, right?
Yeah, I'm just not sure how interested I am in this war with Kingpin. And I watched Hawkeye. Like, I understand the betrayal. I understand I don't know. It's just that part's not really. Yeah, because I'd much rather have 5 episodes of her being awkward back home,
right?
And none of the Fisk
none
stuff.
of the Kingpin stuff.
None of the Kingpin stuff needs to be here.
Because you need to be, like, the show relies on you being emotionally invested in, can she best Kingpin, right? And it's like, even for you as somebody who watched Hawkeye and watched all the other Marvel stuff, it's like that's a hard investment to make at this stage. I think.
Well,
So
again, I'm more invested in what is Daredevil going to do with, you know what I mean? Like I didn't get enough time with Echo in the Hawkeye show. I got enough time to be interested in the character and like, oh, I wonder what you could do with this. I'm just not fundamentally all that interested in this arc with her and King. Even as much as I think Hawkeye and, you know, obviously you don't have the context, but I think they sell pretty well their relationship. Part of that is like, you know, the acting of Kingpin is just like remains fantastic. Like such a good actor. Like it really fits the character tremendously. But I want to fish out a water story in this town with like all these interesting actors and like this character that has to communicate and move through the world differently. There's tension. You can find tension there. You gotta go,
right.
You know, find a bully in that town that she has to work with. I think the Kingpin stuff
have her
really
solve like a small problem, you know, that's like
give me a small town, small town
Yeah.
tension as opposed to all those big old problems in New York with Kingpin. I think that if anything, that is still speaking to this broader problem. It's not the world exploding, but it's still that like bigger scale ish, like kind of like conflict that just is not necessary to tell a good story.
Yeah, it's a win-win to do it that way too, because it probably costs less money, you know. But
yeah.
I do want to give a shout out to Alakwa Cox, who is the actor who plays Maya. She is a deaf Indigenous woman and
first-time actor, right?
Had
if
not
I
acted
believe so
in
as well.
anything. Had not really acted in that much prior to appearing in Hawkeye in 2021. You know, and now she is leading an entire season of television. So just an amazing journey, and it's kind of remarkable that it's a thing that's on television that we can all watch on Hulu right now. So it's worth checking out just because it's something quite different in many ways than what Marvel has done. Other than how disjointed the first half hour feels, and also the overall arc of season 1. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.